All right, I think we are live. I think here it comes. If it's not, we're going to be in 1 second.
Okay.
I do every freaking time. It's like I think there's a delay, so I think it's recording me as it's showing me, and then
Okay.
so that
Gotcha.
seems to be the intro to each one of my videos is me waiting for it to go live. Awesome. Okay, I have this is the seventh episode of Temporary Book Club, and I'm really lucky to have this guy on as we talk about a book called The Hidden Life of Trees, What They Feel, How They Communicate, and Discoveries from a Secret World by Peter Wohlleben. And Doug Gilbert is here. And thank you, Doug, so much for coming to talk to me about this
Thanks
book.
for having me, Mike.
Will you please take a second and introduce yourself?
Yeah, as Mike said, Doug Gilbert. I'm a wildlife ecologist. I work for a private environmental consulting firm based in Cincinnati. I primarily my job focuses on conducting rare, threatened, and endangered species surveys and assisting government agencies and private companies and all manner of different folks that are interested in implementing conservation practices related to, species of concern.
Awesome. That just sounds like if I had it all to do over again, I'd love to learn all about that stuff and get into it. Doug, you moved to Loveland, what, about 2 years ago now? Is that right?
Let's see. I think this is my third year here
Third
in
year.
Loveland.
So
Yep.
Doug moved to Loveland. He saw a video of me speaking to council about some environmentally
Some lead certifications
right lead
for.
certification of new builds, and
Yep.
he got contacted me and just saw that I was on the tree committee, the tree and environment committee, and man, we lucked out meeting Doug. So eventually, after a little bit of time, he helped us out, and then now he's a member of the tree and environment committee with myself and some other great people. And Doug is our go-to guy. Doug is we're just kind of robots, do what you tell us and trying to learn as we go. But Doug's the one that has all the information and helps us out. So as I was looking for this book, I came across maybe a year and a half, 2 years ago, and I didn't finish it. And I wanted an excuse, which is a lot of the books that I'm doing through here are just to get me through the final book. I read like, I don't know, 5 to 10 books at any given time. Sometimes some books go right through and sometimes they sit there for a while. And so some of the books that I've chosen to do are just to get me through them. And I love them, don't get me wrong. It's just kind of the way it works out. And so when I thought of this book, I can do it. And then I was like, oh, well, there's nobody else to go to than Doug. So thank you.
Yep.
All right. So the book is The Hidden Life of Trees. As I do most times, I'm going to read the inside cover just so you get an idea of what they're talking about. Are trees social beings? In this international bestseller, forester and author Peter Wohlleben, convincingly makes the case that yes, the forest is a social network. He draws on groundbreaking scientific discoveries to discover how trees are like human families. Tree parents live together with their children, communicate with them, support them as they grow, share nutrients with those who are sick or struggling, and even warn each other of impending dangers. Wohlleben also shares his deep love of the woods and forests, explaining the amazing process of life, death, and regeneration he has observed in his woodland. After you have read his book, A Walk in the Woods will never be the same again. And I think that's true.
Oh, yeah.
Even reading 2 chapters of this changed my viewpoint a lot. Now, probably not yours. You probably knew a lot of this stuff. But what stood out most about this book to you? Did you learn anything, or what was most interesting, do you think?
So, like you said, a lot of the groundbreaking research that the author touches on really is stuff that has been, these are things that have been coming about since about 1995. There's a professor, she actually wrote a little bit, I think towards the end of the book, she's got a little blurb at the end
Right.
discussing it. And she's done a lot of this research in the forests, the temperate rainforests of British Columbia. And so the author pulled a lot
Susan
of that.
Simard.
Yep, exactly. And actually that was my first introduction into sort of the quote unquote wood wide web, which we may talk about a little bit. But she basically, her and some of her fellow colleagues coined the term wood wide web, which is a reference towards the interconnectedness between the root systems of trees and other plants in the forest, along with the mycelia from the fungi that grow in the ground.
I think that was my biggest takeaway. I think Arbor Day and planting trees. There's great companies out there like, hey, you buy this hat, they'll plant 10 trees. That's great, and maybe a little bit behind, but it's going to bring everything back to the way it was. And I think that was the biggest smack in the face. Is it won't.
Right.
It really won't. The forest, I look at it now, it is what I think the term that they use, or he used in the book, is a superorganism.
Yeah,
it really
indeed.
Is one big organism. We look at these tree and you take one tree out and you put it back, but the root system, and then like you said, the fungal system, what's it called? The mycelium network. Literally, for those of you like me that was new to it, the trees have roots, and sometimes the roots touch each other's roots of trees, and that can do it. But there are miles and I think he said in one teaspoon there's like so many miles
of
mycelium. You can't see it. And so through those little networks, they call it the wood wide web, trees are able to communicate. And that blew my mind. But they work together, they help each other out, they give water, they give sugar, they alert them to things if there's a predator. And at first I think it was a controversial subject. Am I right or wrong?
Well, no, absolutely. And even right now, you would hear some vehement opposition to such concepts from especially individuals in the timber industry, I think, who have a vested interest in ensuring that this perspective that society has of forest is one of, resource extraction. Really, it's an objectification of these things and really saying, they're there as commodities, and that's it.
It doesn't matter if, hey, we're going to let these guys grow for 100 years. It's a forest. A forest is a forest is a forest.
Yep.
And that's what I believe. And that's definitely not the case. And I think that's the big thing. He and she, because he gets a lot of his stuff from her, right. And I want to go back to her in a minute, but they make that case over and over and over. And it goes into even little things such as, there's a type of mite, I believe, or something that lives, and it only lives in old growth forests because they only move 30 meters a year.
Right.
And those are huge to the ecological cycle, and no new forests have them. And we didn't, we take it for granted because we don't know how all these things work together. We're only finding out now.
Exactly.
But all these pieces are not part of new forests, and it's a shame when we get rid of them. So my next question for you, what is an old growth forest?
Yeah, so actually this is another highly contentious term.
Oh, really? I did not realize that.
Yeah. So if you look at any given forestry manual versus, an ecology textbook, forest ecology textbook, you can see a spectrum of ages. Some folks will, throw 100 years on there as sort of an arbitrary number. But really, when we're talking about it from an ecological standpoint, it really depends on the forest. It depends on the location of that forest, and it depends on how long that forest has been there undisturbed from any type of disruption.
Right. I was going to say, I think his definition in this book, but I went out and looked at other definitions, like you said. His definition is pristine, like almost never touched,
right?
Ever. Which is, I think I read Central Europe which I've never been to Central Europe. I've been to Ireland a bunch, but
Mhm.
it has zero old
That's
growth
right.
forest, which blew my mind, because in my imagination is Central Europe is these old forests that you
Yeah.
could walk through, and that's definitely not the case.
Right.
Um, so you mentioned once that old growth forest, that you found one here in Loveland, or you believe so. Which definition would that one fall under?
So that's a bit more of a loosely, so that one's not as stringent. So
Right.
there's the old growth that you're referring to, which would be considered, a couple other terms used are primeval forest or virgin
And he
forest.
used those, yes.
And that's a reference to the fact that it's just never been touched by
And,
humans. Never
and
been.
there's barely any of those.
Right,
Right.
barely
Yeah.
any of those. In fact, the forests of the eastern North America, most of them have been cut 3-4 times over. So the stuff we see throughout most of the eastern North America is very, very young. A very sort of, from a forester standpoint, these are very weedy forests that need to be managed in order to get them to this premier state. But the fact of the matter is they're simply young. And by young, I mean 100 years old, 200 years old. In Eastern North America, the areas that I'm talking about in Loveland, we're probably talking, I'd say, around 200 years old for probably the oldest trees that are in those particular forests. There are some forests in Ohio that have trees that are around 500 years old.
Really? What do you know of any area? Is that be Hocking Hills area or around there?
Actually, no. It's so there are some old growth forests scattered about in the state. Probably the closest one that I'm aware of here is well, let's see. There's actually quite a few of them, but one really nice one that is a state nature preserve is the Davy Woods State Nature Preserve. And if you're familiar at all with some of the tree worker groups in the eastern U.S., Davy will sound familiar.
It sounds familiar, but where is that?
So Davy Woods State Nature Preserve is actually north of here. It's north of Dayton.
Okay.
It's probably about an hour and a half drive north of Loveland. So, but really what you get are these, when you're looking at an old growth forest, there are a few characteristics that you're really going to start seeing. You're going to notice right away, even for a layperson who's never, you go into the forest in your backyard versus an old growth forest, you're going to see some very different things, not the least of which being, big trees. Big trees that have nice, large trunks, no lower limbs, because most of the time what happens are the trees self-prune themselves as the forest starts to grow.
Which I learned. Yeah, I had no idea. That's amazing.
Yeah, they don't need those lower branches. So one of the ways you know that it's an old forest is this tree is huge. It has no lower limbs, meaning
those have been gone. Any marks of them are long gone, right?
Right. And to give you another idea about old growth forests, and to get across that it really depends on the location of where you are. I've done a lot of tree coring, so I'm not sure if you're familiar with that, but basically tree coring is or tree boring is a way you can get a small strip of wood, a core, that shows all the age rings from a tree. So you can extract that from the tree without
harming it,
without damaging the tree, as long as you disinfect your tools and whatnot. That's a whole other thing. But you can count the rings. And I've had forests where I've had trees that are over 250 years old that are only 17 inches in diameter. So
that blew my mind. He talked about 1 inch in a healthy forest, in an old growth forest. A tree could be like 3 inches in diameter.
Yep.
And I would look at it. I mean, honestly, as a layperson that doesn't know a lot about trees, I'm learning. I look at that tree and say, "Wow, look at that tree! Is 2-3 years old."
Yep.
And it was 80. It was like 85 years old.
Yep. Exactly.
Blows my mind.
I've encountered a number of 8-inch trees in diameter that are 100 years old. It's just what it is, it's most of those trees are in sites that they've either been shaded out by other trees, or they've got really sort of poor soil conditions. So they're not getting as much nutrients, and they're just slower going. Also,
But
the
I think I
climate.
read also, though, am I right, though, that that's the way a tree is supposed to grow?
Yep.
Like the strongest tree, the one that's going to live to be 500 years old, which blows my mind. A lot of trees are supposed to live that long, right? I mean,
yeah. And if not more, yeah.
You know, I thought, oh, 5, yeah, or older. I mean, trees were meant to live that age, which, you know, I'm thinking, you know, oh, 100 years is old. And
Right.
then, but the strongest ones are those ones that are waiting patiently for their turn, for the other ones to die out, to get their chance to get up into the sun and get the sunlight. But because they're down there so long, the wood is denser. It's not going to get hurt by heavy snow or anything like that and break apart and die. It's just waiting so long, it's getting that much stronger. Is that correct?
Absolutely. And not only is it getting stronger and they can deal with physical damage from, you know, wind throw and storms and that type of thing, but that dense wood makes it more difficult for insect boring, you know, wood boring insects like beetle larvae to get in there and affect, you know, damage the tree basically.
Right. That was really interesting. The other thing, I mean, just the thing I like, just really silly points, but like I was talking to Kim and my little guy, I'm like throwing out questions like, hey, which tree are you going to get if it's in a rainstorm? What tree is going to protect you more? You know, little silly facts like that.
Yeah.
But they were made for different reasons. The book talked about just if it's raining, the deciduous tree, the leaves, the branches, the trunk are all meant to take the water and funnel it down the trunk to the bottom to go into the roots. And so you're going to get wet under a deciduous tree much more than a coniferous tree, right? Because they are made, or most, they are made to push the water out, almost like a umbrella, actually in detriment to the roots. And he says, oh, I think he used the excuse, nature hasn't learned something.
Yeah.
I don't know why he would put that. I mean, the whole book, he's talking about how smart these guys are, trees are, and they're that. But then he's like, oh, they haven't figured this out yet. No.
The
reason they did it is for snow, right? Because most of these deciduous forests, the reason they're deciduous is they're in colder climates.
Coniferous, yes.
Coniferous, sorry. And they need to be able to hold the snow or push it away. So the rain, it works against them. But anyways, I thought that was a really cool, interesting point. But he does that here in this book a little bit. You know, he's funny where it's almost like if he doesn't know something, I don't know. He seems to jump to conclusions. I think the guy is brilliant. I think he's got some things. I think it was once somebody told me that the book was a little controversial. I started to notice some things in here that just were like, he'll either throw it off or say we don't know, or he'll jump to the other side and be like, oh yeah, trees have brains or something, you know, close to that, you know, something that is even almost like he's trying to make a point but it's almost, I get what you're trying to say, buddy, but you're extending it a little bit too far. Do you know what I mean by that?
Yeah, no, absolutely. There are definitely some parts in the book where I feel like he's stretching a little bit, but I think, you know, ultimately I've listened to him talk in interviews, and he knows he's not the researcher. He's not the guy who's out there. He's really more of a storyteller, and he's finding a way to take this information, which is just chock full of scientific jargon and really is quite unattractive when you look at it from a technical standpoint. And he's trying to take it and make it more digestible for a lay person.
And he takes shit for that.
I think so. I think that there's this sort of duality, like towards you know, with environmentalism, and you know, you can either be very utilitarian and you can look at things as, okay, we can take, as long as we're being careful, we can take, you know, from the environment, no big deal. And then there are, folks on the environmental side that are like, well, listen, we need to think a little bit more about it than just, from a sustainable yield perspective. We got to think about these as, the beings that they are, the beings that comprise these extraordinarily diverse and intricate systems that, are the forests around us.
Yeah. And I'll tell you, like, if you've not read this book, anybody watching this or listening later, the different the different traits, the different things they can do, just that little example of the deciduous and the coniferous and what they do with water, but all the other differences in how they handle predators, and the taste of their leaves when they're lower to the ground and far from the sun are going to not be as sweet, or they're going to be bitter because they're trying to keep the animals away from eating them all. Right. And just the reproduction blew my mind. I don't think about tree reproduction very often. But
I think he likened it to winning the lottery, basically. Yes. You have a better chance of winning the lottery than you do going from an acorn to a mature oak tree.
Right. Yeah. Right. So I think he said for every tree, they create one offspring.
That makes it to maturity.
That makes it to maturity. Right. That makes it to another full grown tree. Yep. But when you think of all the nuts and acorns and all the different ways they put themselves out there, that's amazing. That's amazing. But and also just things like inbreeding. I never thought of inbreeding.
Oh, yeah.
And he has a whole section on that, on how trees try to make sure that they're not fertilizing their own
their own flowers.
Right? Their own flowers.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, it's insane when you start diving into the plant world, because there are so many different mechanisms that plants have evolved to incorporate into their life histories. It's quite fascinating. I think.
What about the deciduous trees and how they wait the deciduous trees, and how a lot of them won't produce their acorns and such every year?
Exactly. Yeah. Actually, we have two sort of major groups of acorns in Ohio. For example, we have our red oaks and we have our white oaks. And they actually the red oaks, typically you're only going to see yield, decent amounts every, 5 to 10 years. You're going to see a bumper year is what it would be called.
And it's true. They all kind of decide together when to do it.
Yeah. No, this is part of that brokering that's going on in the Wood Wide Web, like this exchange of information that is really sort of letting the forest operate as this superorganism, as you mentioned.
Explain to the people, why don't they do it every year?
So every year, I mean, given any given year, a forest may be subjected to a variety of different threats. One of the best ones I think people can really understand, and we had it this year, is when we have late frosts in the season. Mm-hmm. A lot of folks this year got their plants out for their garden, and if they didn't, I think it was maybe 3 or 4 weeks ago, if they didn't, cover their seedlings up overnight for a few days, they were all dead. And that's what happens to a lot of the flowers in the springtime on the trees. So if we get these late frosts, then boom, they're wiped out. So
that's so much energy. I mean, that is like a year's worth of energy to bloom and to put out these acorns.
Exactly.
So they have to measure it out.
Right. Multiple years of energy, because really what these specifically oak trees are really good about this. I remember a forestry professor of mine actually demonstrating to me what it is oak trees do. And they even do this as seedlings, but they put a lot of stock and energy into their root system, even early on in their lives. And by doing that, they're building up an energy reserve for themselves that they can tap into during times of, when they're struggling. And so if you go into a forest and you pull out let's say a maple seedling, you'll see just a nice spindly root. You go and pull out an oak seedling, you get this big, massive sort of tuber almost.
Wow. Yeah.
And it's sort of that behavior, that sort of mechanism that allows them to get a lot of energy and, you know, build it up. And so a lot of trees, you know, when they go to put that energy up into flowering, it's just they wipe themselves, they can wipe themselves out. And they're doing it at the same time of year when they're expecting those energy reserves to be supplemented, because they're going to be putting leaves on for spring and summer. And if they've flowered and they've put their leaves on and they get hit by a late frost, then they're done. They're hurt.
Or I thought it was really crazy. The other thing he explained was population control of the wild animals, right? I think he used boar as an example. Was that correct? Was it boar? Was it wild boar?
Yeah.
Or, I think it was wild boar, but pretty much the wild boar eat these acorns up, and that allows their populations to grow. And so if they allowed the boar to keep doing that, they're not going to be able to reproduce. All their seeds are going to be eaten.
Yep.
And so part of this is, hey, for the next 2 years, we're not going to create acorns. The boar population will go down. Okay. And then less boar will have maybe a couple of them of our acorns survive and have a possibility of growing large. I mean, little things like that. And it's just because you don't think about them. You know, that's what I think is awesome about reading a book. And for those of you that wouldn't think about reading a book about trees, that there's so much of that in this book, you know, that just blow my mind.
It's you know, I oftentimes think of this. I remember as a child, you know, looking at a television and thinking, my God, how does that work? You know, like, I know it works, I'm seeing it work, but I can't tell you how it works. And I'm just going to go on with my life, and, you know, it's working, everything's fine. And I think you know, you tend to do that with these less conspicuous things in our lives. You know, the trees are background, you know, noise. They're not things that we're focusing on. And so it is pretty crazy when you hear these things where you're like, aha, like, oh my gosh, this makes so much sense.
They're not just standing there.
If you're not taking the time to really think about it, you're never going to come to that conclusion.
No. I think that's, you know, one of the examples, you know, the middle path, you know, Buddhism has a middle path where, you know, you don't have to be crazy. Like, if there's a bug on the floor and you're not looking around, you step on it. That's just, you got to live life, right? But if there's a bug on the floor, don't intentionally go smash it.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's the middle way. And I kind of teach my kids the middle way. And at first it takes a second, like, why? It's a bug, you know? Right. And I said, what if that bug was the size of a horse? You know, it's because it's small, you know, may still have the brain, you know, whatever, but would you kill it? You know, how gruesome would that? And to look at the pain or the suffering or whatever, you know, no, of course you're not going to, because you can put that out of your mind. Well, this book made me think of trees that way, except it's not about size. It's about, and this is what he talks about over and over in the book. It's about how slow their life is, the gradualness, the slowness of it. They're moving, they're doing things at all times, but they said, I think electrical current through a tree, they have electrical currents to function, like you could call brain waves, whatever. They move like an inch per second or something. I don't know.
Like 3 inches per minute or something.
Something like that.
But
it's very slow. But that's just it. They live life very slow. But I just think of the same thing. Are you going to hurt this thing if you could see them move at our pace? You know what I mean? Imagine that, man. If you see them grow and doing this stuff and kind of doing what they want, and there's this big tree, are you going to go hurt that thing? No.
Right.
You know, and that changed my perspective too. You know, you get a lot of people give people a lot of shit for being tree huggers or what are you doing?
Yeah.
But when you start to learn about it, I don't think you can be anything but.
No, I agree full-heartedly. I think it's once you learn about the, you know, behaviors of the of trees and the forest themselves, you become familiar with them. It's like you're realizing that you've got this friend, you know, around you, that you know, when you're out in the woods, like you're visiting with like these many friends and whatnot, because you know their story a little bit, and you know, through connecting with them in that way, it becomes, I don't
And
know.
they're about survival, which you don't think of either. I don't think about their life has been a fight, honestly.
Oh, absolutely. And what's so great about this book is we've, even in, you know, still today in academic institutions, we hear so much of the sort of the strongest survive, the fittest survive, you know, this Darwinian concept that is oftentimes misinterpreted, big time, actually.
Yeah, social Darwinism, correct, right?
Well, social Darwinism, and there's the I think people just tend to misuse that
For sure.
thing. But because really what they often are trying to get at is life is a competition, it's a grueling competition, it's a battle, and that's what it is. But it's not only is it competition, but there's this great, a huge amount of collaboration between organisms, because it's through those partnerships and relationships that they you know, develop these connections that ultimately help one another. And you know, he mentioned the fact that the trees, you know, will grow super close together when they're young, and you know, this makes sense from many different standpoints. But he mentions how they kind of they'll hold each other up.
Right.
You know, these young things, they're trying to grow tall. They're very flexible. They're young trees, but you know, so if there's a bunch of them moving together, they can get up there. But if there's only one, they'll snap over because of wind and things like that. And you know, he didn't really touch on it, but the other great thing about those forests is they become very dense, and it's very difficult to move through them. So you know, deer and other organisms, they're not really going to be walking through them. They're going to take an easier path. So it gives the soil that has been disturbed time to recover from whatever that disturbance is.
Yeah, that was another, that really was one of the most interesting points for me, was how trees truly work together. Now, some of them don't get along. You know, I think it said like a birch or a beech and this other kind of tree, they're kind of competitive. But most trees, it seems to be that if this one tree has for some reason, like you said, an oak that might have a better root system and stored more water, and a tree next to it has nothing, they can actually help that guy out.
Yep.
They can actually, because it's beneficial for them to have somebody already there, for several different reasons. So they will actually say, all right, I'm doing okay for now.
Right.
I'm going to feed you for this season, and get you sugars or whatever it is that you need to not die right now.
Right.
And that's, I mean, that is scientifically proven. That's not BS. They test that, they know that, and that blows my mind.
It really is. It's this banking system almost. If you think about loans and whatnot that are provided to companies, as you know, if they're going downhill, they need a little bit of money to keep things going, and then during the good times, they pay that stuff back.
Right.
And that's really what's going on. One of the interesting things that the author doesn't dive into, and it's because there's still the jury's still out on this. It's exactly which organisms are responsible for this transfer of, you know, resources. We don't know if it's the trees themselves, certain trees, only certain trees, or if it's the fungal network, or if it's you know, a mutual type thing that's going on. But it's very much the goal is to produce the most
the strong organism,
rich forest.
right? If you keep going back to the fact that it's a super organism, the forest, then it makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, something else that really I took when I joined, and I don't know if you went to the class when I joined the tree committee. Did you go to that tree committee class?
Mm-mm.
No. One of the things they were teaching, and shout out to Wendy Van Buren, who does an amazing job. She's our forester, Ohio forester for our region. She teaches a great class, and they teach about water. This is what blows my mind, is that we did not know until recently how a tree gets its water from the roots to the leaves. Until very recently. It's in the book. He still says he doesn't know. He still says in the book, he still says we're still figuring it out. But there's an internet, there's a website now. I'll add it to the link, that they figure out the physics of it. And it's too much over my head, but that's not the point. The point is, though, is that we just think we have trees and this all figured out.
Right.
We don't.
No, we don't.
Everybody, if I could ask somebody or myself a year ago, hey, do we know how trees get water to their leaves from their roots 100 feet up? Yeah. Well, of course we do. I learned that in first grade. No, you didn't, because we didn't know exactly how that worked.
Exactly. It's the TV thing. It's like, oh yeah, it works, but
it works, and everybody knows, so I don't need to know.
Right.
And I thought that was really an amazing point.
Yeah, no, I mean, so you touched on that. One of the great things, some of the great research, and maybe this is something that you're referencing, but I actually got the opportunity to go climb a coast redwood, so the tallest trees in the world. I got to go climb one in the Santa Cruz Mountains. And so I was actually out with some lichenologists who are folks that study lichens. So lichens are symbiotic organisms comprised of 3 or more different constituents, usually a fungus, a yeast, and an algae or blue-green algae. But anyways, so they studied those, and they specifically studied old growth lichens because there's a wide variety of lichens that only grow in old growth conditions. So anyways, they actually were discussing with me some of the research they were doing, they were looking at the water budgets for these large trees because it just didn't make any sense. The physics didn't make sense for how these trees could grow so large. And what they found is during certain months of the year when water is most limited, there's fog that's coming in from the coast. And that fog is allowing the leaves to take in water at that time. So rather than having to stress the tree out by trying to pull all this water, massive.
They're actually pulling it in from the leaves.
It's pulling it in through the leaves, and that's how they're able to grow so large.
That makes sense. That's why they're the biggest. That's crazy.
Yeah.
And they're just learning that, right?
They're just figuring it out. To me, the things we can learn just by walking right outside your door. Like
there's a part in the book where he talks about if you take a teaspoon of soil, I forget the number, but there's like more living things in that teaspoon of soil than it's a crazy number.
Right. Yeah.
Of living things in that. And we don't know. They're not identified yet either.
Right.
They said it's like the deep ocean, our own soil. We don't even know all the different living things that exist in there. That's
no, absolutely
crazy.
And what's fascinating for me is because I'm a wildlife ecologist, I get to nerd out a lot for my job. And so I get to learn about some of the new natural history discoveries that are going on around us. And there are new insect species, new spiders, new arthropods, new birds even that are being discovered in North America now, including a bunch of what are called cryptic species that look just like something that looks very common, but is actually very different. But it's only when you start looking very closely at that organism that you realize this is something that's different. So
that's really interesting. You just think we got it all you take that out there, some scientist knows everything about all that out there, and it's like, no, you can do this, you can go really add to our knowledge if that's what you want to take on.
Absolutely.
another thing. Let's see. It doesn't really get into this, but I think it's a really important topic. Did you watch Michael Moore's new documentary?
I have not. No.
Okay, so what Michael Moore does, it's on YouTube. It's for free. It's something about the planet. I think it's called The Planet of the Humans. And what he does is he takes on, which I'm sure you can talk to this. He just takes on the biofuel industry, pretty much. He takes on all environmentally positive industries, and really says, hey, guess what? They're not what we thought they were. Yeah. They're all backed by fossil fuels in those big companies, because none of them are self-sufficient enough to run on their own, really, at all. Wind, solar. So you got this big solar field. They're not creating nearly enough for a community to work off of. So we always need to back it up with fossil fuels, right? So he blows the whistle on that, because they're not producing enough, and we need to kind of really look at this. And then he blows the whistle on biofuels, which is what I want to talk about in a second. But his main point is this: listen, again, somebody like me that kind of knows but doesn't really dig in, and now I'm digging in. You just think scientists know there is a way that we can use wind turbines, hydroelectric, and solar enough for our energy needs. And it's not possible. We have not figured that out. We're not close to figuring it out. So we still need fossil fuels. And so he's saying the answer now is to stop saying that's the future, because it's probably not, and it's just cutting back. We just all have to do our part. That's the only answer that we have to stop climate change, is to cut back production. But a lot of people are now saying, one of the answers, what I want to get to, is biofuel is one of the answers, right? Yeah. Explain what biofuel is.
So biofuel is essentially, you take any type of vegetation that you're growing, and you're essentially converting it into ethanol to produce energy. Biofuel is so we'll take ethanol production from corn. So I'm originally from Greenville, Ohio, which is about an hour and a half north of Loveland, and big agro-centric region of the state. Ethanol, corn is a primary crop on the landscape in that area. And so ethanol, basically what happens is people take all this land that's, used for corn production, and instead of using it for, ag or livestock feed, or the production of sugar for high fructose corn syrup, they're taking it and using it for, have issues of their own. They're taking it and using it for energy that can be, you'll see it in your, if you go to the gas station, you'll see the ethanol, this fuel has, 15% ethanol or something.
Right.
And there's E85, I think, was a big thing for a while.
Right.
But these biofuels are essentially, it's oftentimes forests are one of the things that they want to do. Is
that's
they
what
want
the
to
big thing now. The big push is forest.
Right. They want to take and remove either intact forests, or take other areas, waste areas or whatnot, grow a bunch of trees as fast as they can, mow them down, and use the carbon that has been sequestered into that wood to create the energy. And so basically what happens is you don't get enough return on your investment for,
like all the other ones, like
exactly.
solar, like wind. It's not enough to rely on.
Right. And so you touch on something great here, and it's the fact that what needs to happen is consumption needs to be reduced. And historically we would think that, okay, well, we would look at our energy economy and we would say, okay, well, we've transitioned from, at one point it was wood. We were using wood primarily to fuel our economy prior to the Industrial Revolution.
Right.
And then we switched over to coal, and then we had natural gas, and now we have a lot of petroleum from, the Middle East and other areas. And throughout that time, we've become way more efficient, and all it's done is it's allowed us to do more, consume more.
It's just like being able to feed a population.
Right.
We're worried about poverty or hunger and famine, and so we create the more food, but that just makes our problem worse because our population can now explode.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
And now we got more energy, and so we use that extra energy. Right.
And so with these biofuels, basically the idea is these forests are sequestering the carbon from the atmosphere.
Mm-hmm.
So the appeal is, oh, we're pulling CO2 from the atmosphere. Good. Well, as soon as you burn those trees, you're releasing that carbon right back into the atmosphere. So, and then when you think about all the work that goes into planting the trees, harvesting the trees, and all the energy just associated with that, you just, the math doesn't add up.
And two, if you look at it just straight, if somebody, a layperson, you don't read a book like this or do your thing, somebody could come back to you and say, well, you know what? Trees, they're going to release that when they decay and die anyways, right? Right. Yep. And so you'd say, okay, so it's like, listen, we're not doing anything. We're burning them instead of the decay process that's going to release it anyways. But no.
But that's right.
That's not, it's long-term holding on to carbon. We're not doing that anymore. That actually would help a forest that we don't longer have, an old growth forest that is a superorganism that we no longer have.
Right.
So I think that's my point is I think you could have sold me on this a while ago.
Right.
And it's not until you learn those fine details, you know what I mean? All these things that are really being affected. And then you're like, yeah, this isn't just as simple as, hey, this is nice because we can grow another tree and burn a tree and it's carbon equal. It's not.
Right. Exactly. Yeah, no, it's not equal whatsoever. And really, once again, it's a matter of time and scale. When we're talking about mowing down a forest and burning it for energy use, that's very fast. That's a very immediate chemical and physical reaction. So, and with the decomposition in a forest, a natural setting, though that carbon is being reused and recycled, and it's remaining, a lot of that is remaining within the system. It's not being sent back off into the atmosphere.
Sometimes millions of years, right?
Yeah.
For a long time.
Yep.
Right.
Exactly.
Great.
So if you've heard of forests being carbon sinks, a carbon sink is a good
or carbon vacuum, I think was another term he used.
Vacuum is yep, exactly.
So, all right. Well, hey, I hate to cut you off. We're at our 45 minutes.
All right.
This was great. You you didn't let me down. You knew
this for forever. Yeah.
I know. That's awesome. So next week we're going back to fiction. Have you read this, Doug?
I have not. No.
It's a pretty popular book out there. Why I read it. Actually, I bought it for my fiance for Christmas. And she started it. She likes it, but she never finished it. So I thought, you see it everywhere. You see it out there posted. So I was like, I'll do it. And I enjoyed it. Actually, it's a really good book. I'd recommend it. We're going to talk about it next week with my friend Jen. So if you want to catch us there. And Doug, I would love it if, I wanted to talk about this one other book. Have you read the Understory or the Overstory? I think I showed you that book. Have you read that before?
No, I haven't.
You've seen it though, right?
I'm not sure.
Hold on one sec.
Yeah.
I gotta find it. Stay still. All right. So this book, The Overstory.
It's a Richard Powers, huh? Okay.
Yeah. So it's fiction, but I think this is really a lot based on the doctor that you talked about in the beginning that we talked about today. I think this is a fiction version of kind of her. It takes actually, it's about 5 different stories. My guess was they're all kind of factually based. And then he kind of wraps it all together. But I'll invite you now. Maybe if you want to take a look at this, we could come back together in late spring of 2021 and talk about this bad boy.
Yeah, no, that sounds great. Got
cool. All right. Thank you so much, buddy. And I'll be talking to you soon with all our tree committee stuff.
All right. Sounds good.
All right. Thanks,
Take
man.
care, Mike.
See ya.